The world loves a success story, but what it loves even more is the illusion of one. Because what we see on the surface is rarely the full picture. And when it comes to Millie Bobby Brown, her journey is far more complex than the fame that surrounds her name today. Before the cameras, before the red carpets, and before millions of people across the globe knew who she was just a young girl growing up in a world that didn't yet recognize her potential, a world where dreams felt distant and uncertain, where success wasn't promised, and where every step forward came with risk. Born in Spain and raised between different places, her early life was filled with movement, as her family searched for opportunities that could give her a chance to chase something bigger, something that at the time may have seemed impossible, because moving constantly isn't easy, especially when you're young, trying to find stability while everything around you keeps changing. But sometimes, that instability creates resilience, and sometimes, it builds the kind of strength that prepares you for something much bigger than you can imagine. Her parents saw something in her early on, something that stood out, something different, a kind of natural presence that couldn't be ignored, and they made a decision that would change their lives completely, choosing to support her dream of acting even when the odds were uncertain, even when the financial risks were real, and even when success was far from guaranteed, because chasing a dream in the entertainment industry isn't just difficult, it's unpredictable, and for every success story, there are thousands that never make it, which meant that every audition mattered, every opportunity mattered, and every rejection carried weight. There's a quiet pressure that comes with that kind of life, a pressure that isn't always visible from the outside, because while people often see the success that comes later, they don't see the emotional toll of getting there. They don't see the uncertainty, the doubts, and the moments where it feels like maybe it just won't happen. And yet, she kept going, pushing forward despite the setbacks, holding on to something that many people would have given up on, something that would open a door not just to success but to a completely new life. Because when she was cast in Stranger Things, everything shifted in a way that few people are ever prepared for. The role she played wasn't just another character, it was something unique, something powerful, something that connected with audiences on a global level, and almost instantly, she became recognizable everywhere. Her face, her performance, her presence becoming part of a cultural moment that spread rapidly across the world. And with that came a level of fame that didn't build slowly over time, but exploded almost overnight, transforming her life in ways that were impossible to fully process at such a young age. Growing up is already complicated, but growing up in front of the entire world adds a layer of complexity that very few people truly understand. Because every mistake becomes public, every change becomes a topic of discussion, and every phase of life is analyzed in real time, leaving little room for the kind of freedom that most people take for granted. As the years passed, the expectations placed on her continued to grow, because success doesn't just bring recognition, it brings responsibility, and it brings a constant demand to maintain that success, to stay relevant, to keep delivering, and to live up to an image that the world has already created, an image that doesn't always match reality. And that's where one of the biggest challenges begins, the challenge of identity. Because when people know you for a specific role, for a specific version of who you are, breaking away from that can be difficult, and finding your true self in the middle of that can be even harder, especially when the world is watching every step you take. There were moments when the pressure intensified, moments when criticism became louder than praise, moments when expectations felt impossible to meet, and moments where the line between personal life and public image became blurred, creating a situation where it's hard to separate who you are from who people think you should be. And that's a struggle that doesn't often get talked about, but it's very real. Yet, instead of letting that pressure define her, she began to take control of her own narrative, making decisions that allowed her to shape her own path rather than simply follow the one that had been set for her. And that shift marked a turning point in her journey. That turning point didn't happen overnight, and it wasn't easy, Because taking control of your own life in an industry that constantly tries to define you requires more than just confidence, it requires courage. And for Millie Bobby Brown, that courage began to show as she stepped beyond the image people had created for her and started building something of her own. Instead of being seen as just a child actor who rose to fame through Stranger Things, she began expanding her identity, exploring new roles, new opportunities, and new ways to express herself, proving that she was not limited to one character or one phase of her career, but rather someone capable of evolving in ways that many didn't expect. As she grew older, the transition from child star to adult public figure became one of the most critical phases of her life. At the same time, she began to understand the importance of ownership, not just of her image but of her career, recognizing that true independence comes from having control over the projects you take on, the stories you tell, and the direction you choose to move in. This led her into areas beyond acting, including producing and building her own ventures, allowing her to shift from being just a participant in the industry to someone who actively shapes it. That transition is significant because it changes the dynamic completely, turning a public figure into a decision maker, someone who isn't just following opportunities, but creating them. However, with greater control comes greater responsibility, and the expectations didn't disappear, they simply evolved into something more complex, as audiences began to look at her not just as an entertainer, but as a role model, someone whose actions, words, and choices carried influence. That kind of responsibility can be both empowering and overwhelming, because it means that every step you take has an impact, not just on your career, but on the people who look up to you. And navigating that balance requires awareness, maturity, and the ability to stay grounded even when everything around you is constantly changing. There were still moments of criticism, because no public figure escapes it, especially in an era where social media amplifies every opinion, every reaction, and every judgment, creating an environment where praise and negativity coexist in equal measure. But what sets her apart is how she responded to those moments, choosing not to retreat but to adapt, learning from the experiences, growing stronger through them, and continuing to move forward rather than allowing them to define her. That resilience is a key part of her story, because it highlights the difference between simply achieving success and sustaining it over time. By 2026, her identity is no longer tied to a single role or a single moment, but rather to a journey that reflects growth, transformation, and persistence, a journey that shows how someone can start with a dream, face rejection, rise to global fame, and then continue to evolve despite the challenges that come with it. She represents a new kind of celebrity, one that understands the power of influence, the importance of authenticity, and the value of staying true to oneself in an industry that often pushes people to conform. Yet, despite everything she has achieved, there remains a human side to her story that often gets overlooked, because behind the success, behind the recognition, and behind the carefully curated public image, there is still a person who has had to grow up faster than most, who has had to learn life lessons under the spotlight, and who continues to navigate a world that never stops watching. The reality is that her story is still being written, and while the world may feel like it already knows her, the truth is that there is always more beneath the surface, more growth to come, more changes ahead, and more chapters yet to unfold. Because success is not a final destination, it is an ongoing process, one that requires constant adaptation, constant learning, and constant effort, especially in an environment where nothing stays the same for long. And maybe that's the most important part of her story, not just the fame or the achievements, but the ability to keep moving forward despite everything, to continue evolving even when the pressure is high, and to remain grounded in a world that often tries to pull you in different directions. So when people look at Millie Bobby Brown in 2026, they're not just looking at a celebrity who became famous at a young age. They're looking at someone who has navigated one of the most challenging paths in the entertainment world and continues to grow beyond it. They're looking at a story that goes far beyond the screen, far beyond the roles, and far beyond the headlines. A story that is still unfolding, still evolving, and still far from over. Because in the end, the fame may have introduced her to the world, but it's her resilience, her growth, and her determination that define who she truly is. And that's something no spotlight can fully capture.